Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. It'll come as no surprise to you that I want to focus on digital assets and Fed master accounts. So my first question is about the accounting treatment of digital assets, specifically SEC Staff Accounting Bulletin 121. So this bulletin requires publicly traded companies, including banks, to hold digital assets in custody as an on-balance sheet liability. So will the accounting standards contained in this bulletin that requires it to be on balance sheet be applied by the Federal Reserve to banks and bank holding companies?
That's something we too saw that and understood the implications, and I think that's something we're working on with our fellow bank regulators. And I don't have an answer for you though, but that's certainly something we're focusing on very closely right now.
And I would note that the Basel Committee on Bank Supervision has declined to establish a capital charge for custody digital assets because they're always off balance sheet. They've created a framework called the Prudential Treatment of Crypto Assets that continues to acknowledge that they're off balance sheet. So if the standards of the SEC's staff bulletin are adopted, that would be the first time that custody assets are placed on balance sheet. Do you think it's smart for the U.S. to be imposing bank standards beyond international norms?
So again, I mean, that was the SEC has authority over accounting rules, and that's what this was. And we now have to consider that exact question, and that's what we're doing. I can't really say more because we are working our way through it. But my understanding of it is the same as yours, though, which is custody assets are off balance sheet, have always been. But this is, the SEC made a different decision as it relates to digital assets for reasons it explained, and now we have to consider those.
Yeah, and thank you. I encourage you to consider that and appreciate that you're looking at it and you're aware of it. That's great. So I'll turn to master accounts now, of course. The board and the reserve banks have refused to provide Congress and the public with transparency with regard to the application process. At its core, a master account is a public benefit conferred by the Fed to a private institution. And since a master account is a public benefit, really doesn't the public have a right to know which institutions have master accounts and which have applied for accounts and not received them? Both the FDIC and the OCC publicly list similar application information on their websites today. So could you commit as part of a transparency project to make publicly available a list of institutions that have received master accounts, as well as the institutions that have applied and not received them?
So I'll be glad to look into that. You know our system well, and it really is that the Fed, the board, we set rules, but the reserve banks really make the decisions about granting accounts subject to those rules, and we actually think we can improve on that system with the current proposal we have, and are considering comments on that right now, as I'm sure you know very well.
Yeah, and as you also know that applicants for master accounts are getting whipsawed between the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and the banks. That one says that the Federal Reserve says that the banks have all of the authority they need, meaning Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and others have all of the authority they need to make these decisions, and yet you go to the reserve banks and they say, oh no, we're waiting for the Board of Governors. And so there's a whipsaw effect, and we get no answer. The black hole continues to exist, and my frustration level has long since been at a boiling point. It continues to be at a boiling point. There's no responsiveness. It's a black hole. And I wish to just once again use this opportunity to encourage you to address that. There's just no excuse. There's no excuse anymore, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Lummis, Senator Van Hollen of Maryland.